Well, welcome again to another episode of Victorious Friday, a podcast for Victorious family. Today I have a very special guest, but today I want to talk about, as we think about Victorious family, our mission is to equip and to empower family champions who make mature and thriving parents. And today's guest is one that's led me and helped me and mentored me along the way. In fact, he was mentored and given a motto that he's living out, which is to attempt something so bold and so great that is doomed to failure unless God be in it. And when you look at his calling, his career, if you will, his life, this is a man that's been a pastor for 42 years. He's planted over 30 plus churches. He has a personal passion to make and train disciples for Christ. And I'm one of those disciples that he has invested in. He probably doesn't even realize that the impact that he's had on my life and so many around the world. But he's also a husband, he's a father of 4, and he's a grandfather of 13 children. Randy, I don't think we've added to the 13, but you might update me. But welcome, Pastor Randy Pope.
Well, good to be with you, and it is 15, so there is a bit of an update. So
it's a bit of an update. See, if you let time go by, you've got a fruitful group there that keep adding to your mix here. Well, Randy, today I want to talk to you about a few things. We'll cover a few topics during this time together, and we'll talk about things like unconditional love. We'll talk about the importance of a spiritual family plan in which we emphasize to be intentional in raising your kids in the Lord. We'll talk about even intentionality and imparting one's life to another. I know discipleship is very important to you, but I wanted to start with the topic: how can a healthy church impact the faith of the next generation of children in our country and around the world?
Well, of course, the church is the body of Christ. It's the people for whom God has placed us in community in this world in which we live. I love to think in terms, I love our children and even grandchildren now to be thinking in terms of two kingdoms, that we have a kingdom on earth and a kingdom in heaven. And we're called to live in this kingdom on earth, but with the understanding that our ambassadorship is from that eternal kingdom, that we represent our King Jesus. So in doing so, the church is a place, I think, where you pull out of a world every day and you get to hear the truths of God's kingdom, so that God's people don't feel, and particularly these children, don't feel that they are totally weirdos. No, they've got the truth, and therefore they come to church and live out church among God's people through the week, so that they can come to embrace a biblical worldview. And I think that's the great advantage of the church. It endorses and underscores, or it should, a biblical worldview. And by that, I simply am saying they've got to have the right view of themselves first. They have to have the right view of God, and they have to have the right view of the world in which they've been placed. And only to the degree that they get those correct are they able to have a solid foundation for life. And that's what a lot of parents don't understand. It's the do's and don'ts: be good, don't do the wrong things. No, it's get the worldview.
You know, speaking of worldview, Randy, over the last few decades, we've seen a significant decline in the biblical worldview. In fact, there's statistics that tell us that in the builder generation, if you will, that biblical worldview was somewhere around 64, 65%. But in the next generation, the boomer generation, it significantly decreased around 34%, and then on to 16% in terms of Gen X, and millennials were facing somewhere between 4 and 8%. There's some significant impact that has taken place that has impacted biblical worldview. When you look at it from the perspective of a pastor, or just a perspective of, a leader that's been in the church world for many years, what's the tensions? What's causing some of these dramatic shifts in the way people look at and have a biblical view of how they think about things and how they function in life?
Well, as Proverbs says, as a person thinks in his heart, so is he. And so our thinking of today is very secular. We live now in a secularistic world. Thus, the importance of the church, where we can keep pulling out and in and then going back out to minister into that world. But we have to, while we're in, get that worldview. Literally, it needs to be implanted and just constantly reinforced over and over and over again for someone to be able in this world to deny the secularism, the humanism, all the things that are part of the world in which we live. I have a classic illustration. I had a man who contacted me, and one of the great golfers of today, and he was telling me, I need help. Can I come meet with you? And I hear you meet with men. And I said, well, sure. And so we had mutual friends. So we get together. And when we get together, he starts talking about what a good man he is, didn't want me to be misled. However, he was an alcoholic and couldn't put down his alcohol. And then the next thing it says, now, I'm a good man, but I want you to know I'm also having an affair right now with a woman. I have a wonderful wife and family, and I'm going to lose them, I know. And I don't think I'm a good man. Don't get me wrong. And he went through this litany of all these challenges. And he said, I'm trying so hard and I can't get better. And with that, I knew that the real issue was going to be his worldview. And so golfers really would understand this, but anybody could. That I said to him, I understand in golf that if you have a very poor grip, posture, and alignment, grip, how you hold the club, posture, how your body, is standing, and then your alignment to the target, that if you have those off, that you could practice as long as hard as you want, and you will never get to be very good. Is that true? He said, that's right. And I said, is the opposite true, that if you had a good grip, posture, alignment, that if you knew nothing else about the golf swing, but you practiced and kept those three constantly through the swing, you would eventually become on your own a fairly good golfer? He said, that is definitely correct. And I was able to say to him, do you know, in this world, we have a grip, posture, and alignment. The grip is our view of self. Our posture is our view of God. And then your alignment is your view of the world. I said, would you want me to give you a little test to see your grip, posture, and alignment in those three areas? And he said, sure. And so I gave him 4 options on each one of those 3. First of all, your grip, view of self. Do you believe man is good with a little bad, man's bad with a little good, man's bad? What do you think about man? Well, he picked the wrong one. And I was able to say, now, according to Jesus in the Bible, you would have a bad grip. Let's check your posture and alignment. We go through that. And when we finished, I said, do you realize that according to what God has to say, you have a very poor grip, posture, and alignment, and you're trying so hard to be good, but you can't do it. So what we're doing with children is helping them get that grip, posture, and alignment. That's their worldview. That gives them. And today, they're going to hear the exact wrong view of who man is. They're going to hear the wrong thing about who God is. And they're going to learn the wrong thing about the world that God created. And so once we can come and focus on those 3 with our children, and they begin to embrace that, they get a biblical worldview. And then in their effort to follow and obey, they say, I can do that. I understand it, because they're now following truth. And the world is never going to know that truth. That's the beauty of the church. Bring the truth to the world.
Wow, that's so good, Randy. I grew up challenged with some of those same issues that you just talked about. We went to church on Sunday and certainly practices in our home. But I grew up under this thinking of what we would call performance theology.
Yep.
What could I do to earn God's favor? And, that's never sufficient, as you know. And then years later, actually sitting really under your teaching and many others, I learned something totally different, is that God is sovereign, and that it's about his love and his sacrifice. And it's about Christ on the cross and what he's done. And I fell madly in love with that grace, that love that I experienced for the very first time in a lot of ways. And instead of trying to earn his favor, it was simply recognizing the fact that that favor had already been bestowed on me, and his love. And I became, as you would know, once you fall madly in love with Christ and who he is and what he's done, you're compelled to do. You're compelled to do out of love versus compelled to do out of some performance or earning. So that illustration is so right, and has profound impact on my life. And as a result, I'm dedicated now to imparting that life to another life, which you would call discipleship. When you think about pastors, a lot of times we hear about what we call PK kids, pastor kids, and the challenges in growing up in that pastoral environment at home. And a lot of times we think our pastors are perfect, but you and I know that they're far from it. What encouragement would you
What?
what, what what encouragement would you give our pastors who's listening, Randy, um, as they attempt to raise their own kids in the Lord
Yeah.
with the many challenges that they have?
Oh my, there's so many things. I think any pastor would readily say that it is a challenge to be a pastor raising children today. And the reason I say it's a challenge is not because necessarily of what we as pastors are doing, but what people are assuming of your children, the way they're treating your children, the way they're interacting with them, assuming they should be always very good. They should not have the same struggles that other kids. You're a pastor's child, or you're at Sunday school and the teacher says, we saw this with our kids now, well, your dad's the preacher, so what's the answer to this question? And they hated that. We've always had wonderful relationship with our children, but there was a season where several of our kids would say, I just don't want to be known that my dad's a pastor. And of course, if your dad is in a smaller community as a pastor or a larger church, more influential church, it's going to be hard to avoid that. And it becomes a real pressure on those children. And I just say to parents who are pastors about their kids, do not treat them differently as if you're a pastor's child. You treat them that way, and then demand of others as you see them treating them differently, not to do that. Say, hey, no, you treat my child like you would any child. Don't you talk to them differently. Don't you act differently. And I'm going to try to do the very same thing so that there's no pressure put on them to assume that they have to perform in a way that's not true of their character at all, of who they are. They're just having to perform.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. You know, I'm going to change it kind of in a little bit different direction and talk about, we were talking earlier and we talked about some stories in this topic of unconditional love. Mm-hmm. And, when you think about parents, we have this deep desire to plant this foundation, and we want our home to be that place of unconditional love. We want our family to know and our kids to know. My kids are grown now out of the house, but one of the pleasures that I have is still every other week via a conference line like this one, we have our devotional still taking place after 20 years of designing, that type of format and experiencing it. And to me, it's the highlight of my life, is to sit down with not only my children but also their mate now, and talk about these foundational truths that we're talking about today. And they know that it's a place of unconditional love. There's nothing that they can do to lose that favor. Then that's not saying we may not get a little angry sometime, or maybe even disciplined, but we certainly enjoy one another. And to think for 20 years we're still having these conversations when they're grown, it's just a blessing for me. I think it's my greatest blessing. Talk to me a little bit around this topic, and maybe even tell a story of unconditional love and thinking of the family and thinking of the world you want to take it to.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, I'm sure there are a lot of parents are listening right now that love the Lord as much as you and I do, and whose children may not be so desirous that they want to be on a phone call every 2 weeks with their father having a devotion. That's not where their heart is. That's not where their commitment is. That's not where their life is. And it's not to be something to say that the parent, therefore, has done a poor job, no more than if the children are very much following the Lord, that we can say, look what we did. God certainly uses good parenting. It certainly is harmful to do bad parenting. But at the same time, I think you would agree with me. We know people that I would put them as far more godly, far more faithful in their parenting responsibilities and duties than Carol and I have been. And we've tried to be very faithful, but we look at them as models beyond. And then we see that their children don't necessarily follow or embrace the same commitments and longings that we have. So I think it's really important. I know we went through 2 episodes. One was with our youngest son, who happened to be our most moralistic, I would say most moralistic, but you couldn't have found a better son. He got in high school and he wanted to have a Bible study with me once a week. We'd go out to have breakfast together and get in the Bible and pray. And his desire was always to do that. And in the middle of one of our times, he said, "Dad, you need to really be praying for me." And I said, "Well, buddy, I pray for you all the time." He said, "No, you need to really pray for me." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I'm getting in some bad things. I'm doing some things that are really wrong." And he began to list some of those things, and they were bad stuff. And I'm going, "What? You're doing those things?" And he said, "I am, Dad." And I said, "What in the world? Why? Well, tell me what's going on." He said, "Well, here's the deal, Dad. I don't want God." And I mean, to hear that from this son, I was like shocked. I went, "You don't want God?" And he said, "Well, don't get me wrong, Dad. I want God. In the sense that, but I don't want God, but I want to want God." That's the key. I want to want God, but I love the world right now. I'm falling in love with the world, and I know what it's going to do. It's going to ruin my life, and that's why I want you to pray for me. And I said, "Buddy, are you a Christian?" And he said, "Well, of course I'm a Christian." And we went through an issue that made a discussion there that I won't take time, but went through discussion to point out, in my opinion, that I didn't think he was a Christian. I wasn't so convinced. Well, he stood against me, and in college, 4 years later, he came to faith. And he comes to me and he says, "Dad, you were right." And I said, "What do you mean?" You were right. I wasn't a Christian." I said, "Really? What makes you say that now?" He said, "Well, I now see, because I've become a Christian, I understand what it is to truly love Jesus." Now, he truly become a Christian. He's followed the Lord. He's a discipler of men and shares his faith. I mean, he loves the Lord, has continuously since then. But here was the thing. Later on, we were doing kind of a little autopsy of the whole, his 4 years wandering. And he made this point to us. He said, "You know what kept pulling me back? It was your and Mom's constant unconditional love. You loved me as if I weren't doing those things. You were against them, but you loved us in spite of it, and loved me in spite of it." And he said that just kept pulling at me and pulling at me. Of course, we know it's God's Spirit that's pulling, but always important to know we cannot make our children Christians. That's the work of God, not ours. We can do everything that God says for us to do, but he has to do that. The other story I think might be more pertinent, particularly to godly families, parents, dads that are pastors and so forth. And that would be this. I was talking to one of my daughters who was struggling spiritually. And in doing so, I made a comment, "Well, you're going to pull out of this struggle. You'll come out of this." And she looked at me and she said something that hit me hard. She said, "And Dad, what happens if I don't pull out of this?" I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I'm just so concerned that if I don't, that you're going to forever be disappointed with me." And I said, "Wait, what do you mean by that?" And she said, "I'm just afraid that that I'll never, you won't love me the way I," and I said, wait. Do you think for a minute that I would love you any differently? I'm going to tell you right now, if you never come to walk with the Lord, you totally away, never come back, I will love you absolutely the same. It won't change a bit. Well, she fell in my arms, just bawling, crying. I needed to hear that from you, Dad. And I said, "Really? You would know that, wouldn't you?" And said, "I know you've always loved me, but I just felt you'd be disappointed in me." And I said, "Now, wait. Disappointed, yes. Wouldn't you be disappointed if one of your children maybe started into drugs? You would be disappointed, but you'd love them the same." And I had to make that so clear. And when I did, change it to hear, "You're right. I was thinking that disappointment was like disapproval, that you didn't love me." I said, no. So I think as dads, we've got to make it really clear. We assume they've heard it. In fact, I went to my boys and I said, do you feel that?" "No, Dad, we've always," but certain children, they're going to hear anything. They're going to project upon themselves lack of love from parents. And that's a big thing to make sure they know the difference.
That's so true, Randy. One of the things I say to parents is, especially dads, is that there's never a time in a child's life, especially a daughter's life, that they don't crave the love of the father.
Absolutely.
They see you and they see that image, and they mirror it, and they even look for, in some cases, a mate to fit that image. But that affirmation, that love, that acceptance is so important for boys as well. And so your point is just so well taken.
I'll say this too, if I could say this to add, I think that like when our son started drifting, I remember Carol and I laying in bed one night, had this discussion. I said, Carol, we've always said this, but I want to hear us just affirm it again. If we had to choose between having a child who is, in the parable, the younger brother or the elder brother that does everything right and so forth, heart's not there, but does all the right things, or the younger brother who goes out and just raises hell and does all his stuff, which would we say that we would choose? Because we've always believed that the worse brother is not the more dangerous one. It's the one that's the elder brother who is worse off. So I said, if we want our kid to be worse off, or we want him to be worse, which are we going to pick? And I remember Carol saying, well, I agree. It'd be the one that's the worst. And I said, so we need to celebrate the fact that our child is not worse off right now. He's worse. And that can be a little bit embarrassing when you're a pastor and your kid's not acting the way you want them to act. Well, at the same time, very, very important to understand your love is unconditional if he's elder or if he's younger brother. Same. They've got to hear, we love you. We don't approve, but we love you as you are.
That's so good, Randy. That's so good. I want to turn now to, the importance of a plan in the home, to be intentional. And it's not so much the plan, although it's helped. There's studies out there to suggest that if you write things down, they get done. And so, I found that to be, when I was in the corporate world, that if I write things down, I have a plan. I would never think to open a business without a plan. I would never, think to do some things without a plan, writing them down, because it helps me to think through it. It helps me to pray through it, etc. And we are people of planners. I mean, we plan things like estate plans and financial plans, educational plans. We even have vacation plans. But yet, less than 1% of Christians have a written spiritual plan to lead, guide, and direct their life and their path at home. And we believe, and at least as one example, one tool of so many, that a spiritual plan can help lead and guide and direct your path. Now, it's not the answer, but it's just a help. It's a tool to help you. And you've often taught life plan, have a life plan for yourself. Can you help me maybe help me and the audience even go deeper into understanding the importance, if you will, of having a plan in the home, or even having a life plan for yourself?
Yeah. I think it can be made very complicated, and I don't think it should be. I think it'd be very, very simple. And I know you're a master of that whole subject and have written about it and taught about it many, many times. I'm sure most of your audience has heard, but the way I have done it through the years is as a life plan is the same as a family plan, which is the same as a business plan, which is the same as a ministry plan. And by the way, pastors that listen to this, I'm telling you, having a ministry plan is one of the most important things a pastor can do. But people say, well, what is a plan? What do you mean? And this is one way. It's not the way. It's one way to outline a very simple plan. And that is, you answer 5 questions. And however you answer those 5 questions, that's your plan. Simple as that. The 5 questions are these. Number 1, what is your purpose? So if it's a life plan, why am I alive? Why do I live? If it's a family plan, why do we have a family? If it's a business, what's the purpose? So it has to do with your purpose to begin with. So what is your purpose? Number 2, you ask yourself, what are we trying to accomplish? That's always, that's your vision. What are you trying? Some people call it your mission, doesn't matter, but your vision, what are you trying to accomplish? And you answer the question. What are you trying to accomplish in life? What do we want our family to be able to accomplish? What are we trying to accomplish as a family? The third is what I call your mission, and that is, how are you going to go about accomplishing your vision? So now I get down to some of the details. If we do this, this, and this, then this vision can be fulfilled. But we have to make sure we have those points that we're trying to work on in order to accomplish that. Number 4 is what's most valuable to us. So that's your values. You got to have, what are your values? That to us as a family was probably the most important. Just what are those values? And so you write out the values. And then the last thing is how will you know if we're accomplishing our vision? Meaning, what are the goals? What kind of goals do we have to try to see if we're making progress in accomplishing this? And so you just write those things out. And then I notice every year you tweak them a little bit and you change them a little bit, and that's perfectly fine. But you pretty much have a standard plan that you're looking at from time to time and re-looking, how are we doing here? Are we making progress here? And so forth. I love what you say. You write it down, more often going to get it done. So just to have something before us. I'll say this one thing, and I'll quit on this subject, but I wanted my children to know the plan, but most importantly, the values. I wanted them to know what our values were. And of course, anytime you read about values, you hear if you have more than 3 or 4, you have too many, you basically might as well have none. Well, I violated that because I couldn't get it down. And I got from about 30 down to about 12. And I said, okay, I'm sticking with 12. And I knew it was too many, but I said to my kids, and I'm not beyond bribing them on certain things. And I said, look, I'm very cheap. You know that. I'm tight. You don't get money given to you, and they love money. So as little kids, I said, okay, if you can memorize word for word, not only the value, but we had a definition of that value. And if you can do that whole page of values and memorize it all, I will give you, when I told them the amount of money, they thought I was absolutely, no, you will not. I said, no, I will. This is my commitment. Well, they were awed, which showed them how important I saw this to really be. And so I said, but here's the deal. They said, oh, I knew there was a catch. I said, well, there is. You have to be able to quote it perfectly, and then you get 25% of that big amount of money. Now, you have to wait now, after that, a complete month. And then you can do it again. And if you do it again, you get 25% more, another month, 25, another month. So I knew if 4 months, they kept it going over in their minds and could remember it, that I knew one day they'll forget them, as I know they have. You couldn't ask my children, right? You could ask now, they wouldn't. I don't remember them. I remember doing it, but I don't remember what they were. But I figured it would get logged into their subconscious. And that then if they just saw Carol and me living out those values, being faithful and consistent, that would be enough to imprint them. Well, I remember years later, Carol was taking one of our daughters to college, and I couldn't go that weekend. They were setting her up in her room and so forth. And I was going to go the next week. And when I was about to go into the room there, Carol said, I think you're going to like what you see when you walk in. And I walked in, and there above her bed, she had in calligraphy the Pope values. And there they were above her bed. And I thought, I would have never dreamed that she even had held onto those for all those years. So you never know what imprint you can make.
Right.
But having a plan, I think, is always a good idea.
Oh, that's good. I think so as well. I was going to challenge them. I'm sure the kids did remember those values. They maybe not remembered in a way that exactly, but I'm sure they held on to them. You know, one of the scripture verses that we hang on to here in the Chatmon family, at least that encourages us, is Ephesians 6:4. We could have taken from Deuteronomy and so many other places, but Ephesians 6:4 has stuck with us. And that is fathers really speaking to parents, not to frustrate our children, don't exasperate them, but to train and instruct them in the Lord. And in my mind, that's family discipleship and imparting our life to our kids, which is really the greatest joy that we have as parents. Some people say challenge, I say joy. that I have as a parent to invest and impart my life as much as I can. And this is a life that Christ has nurtured and with all of its frailties and flaws, but to impart that life to my kids. And my prayer is that they will continue to impart this teaching for generations to come. We're not just focusing on just our kids, but our grandkids and their kids and so forth. And we would love to, and our prayers for generations upon generations will come to know the Lord and what he's done. Randy, something as you was talking just kind of came to my mind. We just had Ken Blanchard on a few weeks ago, and I know Ken was one of those kind of early people that you reached out to as you were forming Perimeter Church, and had a conversation with him and talked about, Ken is famous for situational leadership, and you've kind of used some of that formula to shape some of your thinking and some of your doctrine around in terms of, directive to coaching and supporting and delegating is the way that Ken speaks to it. I'd love for you to kind of think about that conversation and your takeaway and how it's impacted your leadership in the church. And what words of encouragement would you give to pastors as they're building their ministry plan to think about getting people to what you call the second floor of ministry?
Yeah, it's interesting. Our story, I won't go into it in detail, but the story was that I had a man invest in my life when I was early high school. And by the time I was a junior, he had me discipling other men. And he had me doing it using a kind of a plan that he modeled with me that I just took and didn't use the exact same terminologies and so forth, but I began to do with the guys that I was discipling. And so after many, many years of doing that and planting a church, we found out that something uniquely was happening in my small group that was probably not the same impact that was taking in the other small groups. And they asked me as a staff, what are you doing that's differently? And I told them that I focused on 5 things. And one was truth. The second was equipping. The third was accountability. The fourth was mission. And the fifth was supplication or prayer. And how I used that, and we talked about it. Well, they began to realize that we need to try that in all of our groups and see what happens. And we had this just explosion of maturity and growth and leadership development that took place as a result. So I was with a group of pastors who had been invited together by Leadership Network to meet with resourcers, and they had Ken Blanchard as the resource the first time I met Ken. And now here we were years into the life of our church, kind of maybe 15, 20 years, and seeing our discipleship just impacting. And somebody asked him, Ken, how is it that it seems like every single book you've written and all of your companies have been successful. What's the secret? And that's when he mentioned this situational leadership paradigm. He said, every book I've written is on the situational leadership. Every company I've started has been around the principle of situational leadership. And he explained the 4 boxes that you did. And when I saw that, that's the first time I'd heard that, and it hit me. I said, wow, if you look, and he has it in a box, in 4 quadrants. Mm-hmm. And if you took the front left box and you said, there's your directing, I looked at that and I said, that's the same as what we're calling truth. That is our emphasis on truth. You got to know what the Bible says. What is this? But you can't just go from there. So he says, then you go up to coaching. And I said, ooh, that's our equipping. That's where we spend so much time equipping, massaging the truth until it becomes understandable and usable. Then you can scoot them over here, what he called support. And I thought, there's our accountability. That's the same thing, except it's not behaviorism. It's finding the sin beneath the sin in the spiritual dimension. But then you drop them down to what he called mission, or what we called mission, and said, well, that was his delegate. And we put prayer in the middle, and I went, so impactful in lives. And so somebody asked Ken, said, Ken, how did that come about? He said, I don't know, but I learned this, that when I became a Christian, I found all this was biblical. That's what Jesus did with people. And you've got to take them up, as that's your second story you're talking about. You got to take them up, across, and down. One thing Ken said that day that imprinted me indelibly, and I've met with him many times since, several times. We've filmed together, we've done things. He said, at that moment when he was talking to us, he says, one thing you never want to do, pastors, you just do not want to do. Don't ever go from box 1 to box 4. If you go from directing to delegating, you will create disillusioned learners. And then he made this statement. He said, I know of no organization as notoriously guilty for producing disillusioned learners than the church. Because the church, everything we do, preaching, classes, seminars, small groups, they're directing. Then we say, go do it. And we create disillusioned learners. So our practice now in our church and now beyond with our life discipleship is let's help churches learn how to put that second story on. And the same is true in parenting. I think if you tell kids, this is what you do, now go do it, but you don't coach and support, you're going to have disillusioned learners as kids who tried hard and said it didn't work for me.
Oh, that's so good, Randy. Well, for parents out there, we want to encourage you to even take a look at one of our resources, Do Your Children Believe, a book that I've written a couple of years ago. I hope that it encourages you. I hope that it prepares you and gives you one additional tool of many for raising your kids in the Lord. Randy, as I wrap up, I want to give you a free rein to share what's on your heart. And there's a couple of areas I was thinking about, but I don't want to limit it to that. One, I just think about the tensions that pastors are going through right now, to the church coming out of COVID. Man, so many challenges there. And then just parenting. To see, there was a stat by Barner shared the other week that 65% of parents feel inadequate to raise their kids in the spiritual formation that we're talking about. And these are Christian parents. So I'll let you take it wherever you want to close, but I'd love to get a parting statement from you in anywhere your heart takes you, anywhere your mind takes you, just to close this session out. Randy, let me turn it over to you with any parting words.
I don't have anything prepared or something. I love simplicity. I just believe that if you want to be successful in anything you do, then you always have to make it simple, and therefore it can be, number 2, repeatable. You've got to repeat, simple, repeat, just repetition over and over and over and over. Simple and repetitive is the key. And then you add modeling to that with the right motive. And then you've got a good formula. But I think in terms of with parenting, which is our focus here, I think the little formula and using that, make it simple. If you have devotions with them, don't have a huge, amazing Bible study and teaching and, keep it simple that you can repeat every week. You'll finally give up as a parent, say, I can't keep coming up with this new data, new information. No, make it simple, repeat it. And then whatever you're teaching, model it. There's your little formula. But then set that within this formula. And that is time plus love equals impact. You've got to love them. You have to love. Love is not giving kids what they want. It's giving them what they need. So it doesn't mean I'm just handing out and making everything fun and simple, but it is love. They've got to see that what you care about more than anything else is their heart. That's it, their heart. And that they are their heart, and therefore you love them. But love and then time. If you say, oh, I love you and I love you, but I don't ever spend time with you, they go, I don't know that I believe that. So as a pastor or a parent, you got to say, I have all these other things. I'm not going to go to an extreme and I see parents do this, where they say, you're my idol. You're all I care about, seeing your success. And no, they got to see you also committed to the church, a lost world, and all the other things. But they see that you love being with them and that you do carve time, important time, to be with them. And I think a child has got to be able to say, unless they know their parent is in a situation they absolutely cannot, they have no options. There are those circumstances where they say, you know what, my dad, more than anything else, wanted to be with me. That's what he really wanted. And he loved me when he was with me. And when he wasn't with me, I knew he loved me. That to me is a great formula for security. I wish I'd done a better job of it.
I think you've done a fantastic job. You'll never admit that, because that's okay. I can help you. But I want to thank you, Randy, for taking some time today. I think pastors will be blessed. I think parents will be blessed, and many people will be blessed by what you shared on this community conversation today. So thank you so much. Continue to keep doing what you're doing. And people, Randy will never say this, but I want to encourage you to connect with him. He's now going into this new phase of life. Actually, he's been living it out for quite some time, and where we call it life on life discipleship. And he's a pastor that's written quite a bit on the topic. And I pray that you would just be in prayer around getting to the second floor. What does that look like? And for parents, I think Randy's word, the last word, was just so powerful. We say that just love them well. When people ask us, what's the magic bullet? What's the secret? I don't have a secret. I don't have a magic bullet other than just love them well. And we found that loving them well works well. So thank you so much, Randy, for an amazing time with us. And we appreciate you. And we will talk with you soon.
All right. Thank you for having me.